Before Diary of a Wimpy Kid was a book series, it was published online. The online version is over 1,200 pages long, which is pretty impressive. I will leave a link to it in the show notes. It looks like Jeff Kinney wrote a new entry every single day for a year, which is major dedication. Most of the stories and the jokes from the online version were recycled in the book series. I recently read the first three Wimpy Kid books. Pretty much everything in those books is in this online book version. It is in a different order, though. For example, we'll have a story from book 1 right next to a story from book 3, only the ending is a joke from book 2. This was fascinating to me in a nerdy sort of way. What was the decision-making process when adapting the online version into book format? Because if it was up to Greg, he probably wouldn't put that much effort into it. He'd copy-paste 200-page chunks while making as few changes as possible. I gave the first three books a 10 out of 10, so I have to give the online version a 10 out of 10. It's the same basic story, but even longer. I will do a separate video pointing out the differences between the online book and the first three books. I think the major changes are mostly minor things. In the online version, the family goes to a Catholic church. In the books, it's a generic church. In the online version, Greg has a second friend named Colin. The books keep all the stories with Colin, they just change them from Colin stories to Raleigh stories. So even though it's different, it's still basically the same. I was reluctant to do a full summary of the online book, because it's over 1,000 pages, and I've already summarized most of this material. Just watch my reviews for the first three books if you want to see that. So I'm going to try something new and see if it works. I took the summary from the Diary of a Wimpy Kid wiki, and I fed it into an AI text generator. I'm pretty sure Greg would do the same thing. Why bother to write a 1,000-page summary when a computer can do it for you? So here is the AI written summary of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid online book. This is a summary of Diary of a Wimpy Kid, where 7th grade protagonist Greg Heffley shares his experiences. Greg starts a journal to avoid answering personal questions in interviews when he becomes rich and famous. He finds himself stuck in his seat with no escape in class, and notes the school's alphabetical order seating, which puts him next to Alex Aruda. No, that's not true, but there is a joke about alphabetical seating. He introduces his spoiled younger brother, Manny Heffley, who calls him Bubby. Greg is annoyed with his parents for spoiling Manny, who's allowed to write on his door with markers. Greg also talks about the Cheese Touch game, started by Darnell Washington, which involves passing on a piece of cheese. Okay, that's not exactly how the Cheese Touch works, but close enough. In the game, Greg protects himself from the Cheese Touch by taping his fingers together, but he gets a D in handwriting. Greg also introduces his best friend, Rolly Jefferson, and complains about his dad's behavior, vacuuming early in the morning and talking about other people's successful kids. From September 20th to October 1st, Greg spends his days at home, dealing with different situations. He argues with his father about video games, spends time with his friend Colin, and sets off a model rocket that ends up in the woods where a bully named Herbie hangs out. Greg lies to his mom and is punished by having to clean the basement. He tries to keep an honesty policy, but faces some difficulties, such as when he meets his old friend Ben at church, causing a commotion with his goofing off. Oh yeah, Greg has a best friend named Ben who moved away. He gets mentioned like 4 or 5 times in the online version. That's another change. Greg also tries to petition to allow boys to do girl push-ups, but cancels it when he realizes who signed it. He has the idea to create a TV show and writes a script, but his friend Rolly rejects the role offered to him. Lastly, Greg starts soccer practice and finds out that he has a coach named Mr. Keith, who hates him. Over the course of a few weeks in late October and early November, Greg plays in his first soccer game, but doesn't get to do much, except retrieve the ball when it goes out of bounds. He's excited to have a day off for Columbus Day, but gets in trouble at school when he tries to run for treasurer and his campaign posters are taken down due to fabrications. He's also dealing with his younger brother Manny calling him a pootie, a word he finds insulting, but doesn't know the meaning of. Greg also has some funny interactions with his family and friends during this time. He sees the girl he likes, Piper Matthews, at church and worries that his friend Ben will tell her some of his jokes. He's annoyed by his brother's band practice and relieved to have soccer practice to miss it. He also tells the story of how his older brother Roderick's band, Loaded Diaper, was formed. One major event in this section is Halloween, which Greg and his friend Rolly go trick-or-treating for. They encounter some obstacles along the way, including a delay caused by one of Greg's family members, some teenagers chasing them, and a spooky shortcut that Anne, Greg's mother, warned them not to take. They eventually make it home, but Frank, Greg's father, ambushes them and soaks their candy. Other notable events in this section include Greg getting a 0 on a state capitals test after a classmate covers up the map, and him and Roderick being sent to rake leaves at their grandma's house. They don't finish the job properly and end up not getting hot chocolate like they were promised. Greg plays a trick on his friend Chirag, pretending he's invisible. He also signs up to be a tree in the school play because he does not want to sing, and likes the idea of throwing apples at Dorothy. However, apple throwing gets banned, and he discovers that he has to say only one word, ouch, during the play. He learned the invisible Chirag joke from his mom, and finds out that Anne has an idea to stop Greg and Roderick from fighting. Greg's soccer team loses in the playoffs, and his teammates blame him. The school play is a disaster as Rodney James gets stage fright, and nobody can remember their lines. The kid who played Toto only reads comic books when he's not required to move. To make things worse, Manny shouts Bubby when he sees Greg on stage. Roderick attends the play and sits in the front row, which embarrasses Greg. Greg's school has divided into boys and girls, and they will do different activities for gym class. Greg is not happy to be doing wrestling, especially after finding out he must wear a singlet, which is like an 1800s bathing suit. He tries to impress his dad by playing wrestling video games, but he realizes it is not easy when he is paired with Stinky Williams, a kid who smells like rotten eggs. Meanwhile, his snacks keep getting stolen, so he sets up traps to find the snack thief. Later, Greg learns that his mom has started a new reward system called Mom Bucks, and he decides to make Christmas cards for good deeds. Also, Greg realizes he needs to gain 20 pounds to get out of Stinky's weight class and build muscle. However, he must use household items to create weightlifting equipment, and Rolly becomes his first customer. The last chapter shows how Greg's mom embarrasses him on Secret Santa Day by not following the rules. They then go to the store to buy gifts, but Greg finds it challenging to pick a suitable one. Greg and Rolly are trying to figure out how to spend their winter break. They talk about Fregley, the strange kid who lives between their houses, and how he's homeschooled by his mother. Greg signs up for independent study to avoid a project from Home Ec 1, but he and his classmates end up brainstorming ideas for a futuristic robot, which ultimately gets cancelled. Greg starts swim practice, but is embarrassed when he wears a hand-me-down bathing suit from Roderick, and gets pantsed by some of the soccer team. Rolly gets a new babysitter, Leland, who Greg thinks is a good dungeon master, but Roderick says is the biggest nerd in school. Frank surprises the family with a new dog, and they struggle to come up with a name for it. In the final section of the book, Greg attempts to copy Roderick's history paper for school, but finds it's in Roderick's handwriting and unusable. When he gets home, his mom catches Roderick trying to cash in his mom bucks for a used motorcycle, and the mom bucks program is ended. Greg signs up to be safety patrol to get free hot chocolate and be 10 minutes late to class, but during a cold swim practice, he wraps himself in toilet paper to stay warm. He later discovers that his dad wants him to attend Bishop Garrigan High School and tries to convince him otherwise, even resorting to pranking their neighbor, Mr. Blair. Greg is tricked by his parents into staying with his grandpa, where he has a miserable time and spends the night in the bathroom with the lights on, after Grandpa tells him there are monkeys in the walls. That sounds so ridiculous, but that is surprisingly accurate. At school, Greg disagrees with the message of the movie Free to Be Me and continues to work on his science project with Rolly. When he begs his dad not to go to Bishop Garrigan's open house, Frank ends up refusing to take Greg. So that's the AI generated summary of the Diary of a Wimpy Kid online book. Seems accurate enough. It's basically the same story as the first three Wimpy Kid books, so if you like the first three Wimpy Kid books, you'll probably like the online version. As I said, I give it a 10 out of 10.